There's a story that may or may not be apocryphal. You can decide for yourself. It's a story of a U.S. naval ship heading near a coast, and he sends out a message to a light that is headed towards him and says, "You need to divert your course 5 degrees to the south or we will collide." And back across the radio comes the reply, "You divert your course 5 degrees to the south to avoid a collision." Now, I don't know how many military men you've been around, but most captains of ships don't take well to being told what to do. So the captain replies, "I am the captain of a U.S. naval ship. I say again, divert your course." To which the commander replies, says, "I cannot. I say again, you must change course, sir." Finally, the captain of a ship, angry, sends back, "This is an aircraft carrier. We are a warship of the United States Navy. Divert your course now." To which the reply comes back, "I'm just a lighthouse operator. Your call." It's a great issue of pride, right? At what moment will you yield to someone else's authority? At what moment are you willing to admit, you know what, maybe I'm not the biggest, baddest guy on the planet, and I must yield to someone else's authority? And so we have this humorous illustration, but we're going to look at the story of Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. We're going to pick up reading in verse 19. I'm going to kind of get us to that point here real quick, and then we'll start reading in verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was, and I've said this multiple times now, he was the most powerful man in the world. In fact, historically speaking, he's one of the most powerful men to ever exist. You know, even in Rome, as powerful as those Caesars were, they had a senate that could keep them in check and their balance. Nebuchadnezzar was an absolute dictator. If he spoke it, it came into being. If he wanted it to happen, it did. He was incredibly powerful. And he built this massive kingdom that stretched basically everything you think of in your mind as the Middle East today. From Egypt to Israel to Iran to Iraq to Afghanistan. It was all his kingdom. He owned it all. All the way up into Turkey. And I mean, it was a massive empire. And whatever he wanted to happen, happened. And so he naturally began to think highly of himself. And then one night he has a dream. And if you were here the week we did Daniel chapter 2, the beginning of Daniel 4 is similar. He has this crazy dream that keeps him up all night, that disturbs him, that he doesn't understand the meaning of. And he calls in all of the smartest people in the empire, those Chaldeans we've been talking about, the Magi, the astronomers, everybody he can find, and no one can interpret the dream. But this time, instead of threatening to kill everyone like he does in Daniel 2, he's mellowed a little bit in his old age. He just knows I need to go get Daniel. Daniel's the guy who knows the answer. He knew the answer in chapter 2. He's going to know the answer today. So he sends for Daniel. And if you want to, kind of for context, to read, most of the first 18 verses are Nebuchadnezzar telling Daniel his dream. What we're going to do is pick up in 19 because Daniel is going to interpret the dream and kind of retell it as we go. So we don't have to read the dream twice. We're just going to pick up in 19. But for your own study, you might want to go back at some point and read the beginning. So here's verse 19 of chapter 4 in the book of Daniel. Then Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, was stunned for a moment, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king said, "Belteshazzar, don't let the dream or its interpretation alarm you." Okay, so Daniel heard the dream, and he knew that the dream was bad news. He knew that what he had to tell the king was not going to be taken very well. And remember, this is the king that last week tried to throw his friends into a fiery furnace when he didn't like what they had to say. And the week before, threatened to cut off everybody's arms and throw them out to the four corners of the field because he didn't like what they had to say. So giving this particular king bad news is, well, it's not for the faint of heart. Belteshazzar answers, "My lord, may the dream apply to those who hate you, and its interpretation to your enemies." Daniel here hoping that the dream is not for Nebuchadnezzar, but it is. Now here's the dream, verse 20. "The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, whose top reached to the sky and was visible to all the earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, And on it was food for all, and under it the wild animals lived, and in its branches the birds of the air lived. That tree is you, the king. For you have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown and even reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to the ends of the earth. I'm going to pause there for a moment. So here's the dream. There's this incredibly massive tree that grows up out of the ground, with branches stretching as far as the eye can see. And it's got all kinds of fruit growing on the branches, all sorts of abundant food to eat, and the birds of the field are coming and landing and finding shade there, and the animals of the field are coming and making their home there and finding protection there, and it stands strong and provides shade and protection for all the world. That's you, Nebuchadnezzar. You have built this massive empire. You provide for thousands of people. You give protection, you give food. People all over the earth are counting on you. In fact, he even uses the word there at the end. He says, your dominion extends to the ends of the earth. In the Bible, dominion is a loaded word. Okay, it's one of those words that you don't use at all in your everyday language. But if you were to type it into your Bible search engine on your phone, you'd get 60 hits. And you'd be like, why in the world is dominion in the Bible so many times? It's the word in Genesis when Adam and Eve are put in charge of the garden. It says you have dominion of all the land. It's the word in the book of Numbers when they're getting ready to go into the promised land, and Joshua's going to lead the armies, and they're going to take all these kings, and he says, you're going to take away their dominion. They're not going to have control anymore. It's a word that's used to describe David. David had dominion over all of Israel. And most often it is a word used to describe God. It appears 30-some times in the book of Psalms. For the heavens are your dominion. For your dominion is from everlasting to everlasting. It's a word that literally means you have control. You are in charge. You are the king, and whatever you say goes. You are the final authority. If you want a way to remember that, just ask yourself, in your house, who has real dominion? Think about that for a moment. I saw some of you raise your hands, and it's only because your wife isn't here. Or your kids aren't here. The truth is, for some of you, the 3-year-old has dominion, right? We've all been in those homes. Wow, I love when they're just that late. I appreciate that. Nebuchadnezzar was given dominion over a massive part of the world. In fact, most of what was known, he was in charge of. And when he spoke it, it happened. When he desired it, it took place. And so Daniel's interpreting this dream, and he goes, listen, you have been given dominion to the corners of the earth, but, and now we're in verse 23. Then the king saw an observer, a holy one coming down from heaven, and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and its roots in the ground, and with a band of iron and bronze around it, and the tender grass of the field. Let him be drenched with dew from the sky, and share food with the wild animals for 7 periods of time. This is the interpretation, your majesty, and this is the sentence of the Most High that has been passed against my lord, the king. You will be driven away from the people to live with the wild animals. You will feed on grass like cattle, and be drenched with dew from the sky for 7 periods of time, until you acknowledge that the Most High is ruler over the kingdom of men, and he gives it to anyone he wants. As for the command to leave the tree stump with its roots, your kingdom will be restored to you, as soon as you acknowledge that heaven rules. Now there's a lot loaded in there, so let me describe what the interpretation is, and then I'll give you some historical context. So basically, Nebuchadnezzar is going to have his kingdom taken away from him. He is proud of himself, he is full of himself, and the dictate here is, this is going to happen until eventually you realize that God in heaven is in charge and not you. You're the U.S. naval ship, he's the lighthouse. He's not moving, you are. You may think you're big and bad, but you're not the biggest guy on the block. You need to understand that your kingdom is a gift from him, and until you get that, there's going to be punishment. I'm taking it away. I always picture in this dream, you ever see somebody take a tree down, inside the city limits? Like if you live way out in hillbilly country where I grew up, you want to take a tree down, you just cut it down and it falls, and then you cut it apart. But if you do that like right in the middle of Dover, you cut a 60-foot tree down, it's going to hit a house and a garage and a pool and maybe a small kid on his bicycle. Only if you aim well. And so when you take a tree down in the city, there's guys who do that for a living. They climb up and they cut the branches back a little bit at a time, right? And then they begin to cut the tree down from the top. And you can see this tree that used to have all the birds in it and all the fruit and all the shade slowly just being dwindled and taken down to size. By the way, this is the passage from which we get the phrase, I'm going to cut you down to size. Nebuchadnezzar is about to be cut down to size. And his punishment is, tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor. Your punishment, O king, is you're going to spend 7 years thinking you're a cow. Seriously, that's the punishment. I mean, some of us eat like we're cows, but that's an entirely different thing. He's going to spend 7 years walking on all fours in the wilderness, eating grass with the wild animals. That's his punishment. He's going to trade in the royal robes of the palace for the rags of the field. The massive golden palace he built for himself is going to become a tree that he sleeps under at night. The food of the royal table is going to become grass in the field. He is going as far down the totem pole as you can go. When you go from king of the world to cow, I can't think of a further fall. For what it's worth, there's actually a medical diagnosis for this. It's called boentopy. It's a medical diagnosis. There's a whole field in which people have a psychotic break and begin to think they're animals. And they act and walk around and live like animals. The most common one that we have the most recorded history of is called liontopy, and it is when you believe that you have become a wolf or a canine. In fact, there are a lot of recorded instances from about 500-600 years ago of people who would leave their small village, who would move into the woods, who would stop cutting their hair, who would stop shaving their beard, who would hunt like a wild animal, and would howl at the moon at night. It is where most people believe we get the myth of the werewolf from, because these men in their villages would turn into wolves. So while it is rare, the idea of someone having a psychotic break and thinking they're an animal instead of a human is not that, it's not unheard of in the context of psychology today. Now we have to ask the question, why? Like, could you just go be in jail for 7 years? Wouldn't that be like, couldn't you just be calm? Because Nebuchadnezzar needs to understand that without the blessing of God, he's nothing. He's nothing more than an animal. If God had not given him everything he gave him, Nebuchadnezzar is a nobody. All that he thinks he has, all that he thinks he's worth for, all that he thinks he should get credit for, he's a nobody. He's nothing more than a wild animal, if not for the grace of God. So Daniel gives this interpretation to the king, and then he gives him a piece of advice in verse 27. He says, therefore, may my advice seem good to you, my king. Separate yourself from your sins by doing what is right, and from your injustices by showing mercy to the needy. Perhaps there will be an extension of your prosperity. In other words, stop being such an arrogant jerk, Nebuchadnezzar, and maybe God won't punish you. Maybe this dream is just a warning. Maybe this will be enough that if you change your ways right now, you humble yourself before the God of heaven, maybe God will have mercy on you. Nebuchadnezzar, however, is a man, and so he doesn't take advice very well. That was a joke. Verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, as he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, the king exclaimed, is this not Babylon the Great, that I have built by my vast power to be a royal residence and to display my majestic glory? Do you hear the arrogance? Do you hear the pride? The king exclaimed, is this not the Babylon the Great that I have built by my vast power to be a royal residence to display my majestic glory? Look at me! Look at my army! Look at my palace. Look at my kingdom. Look at all that I've built. Aren't I great? And in that moment, a messenger from heaven appears, and Nebuchadnezzar begins 7 years of eating grass. Aren't you great, Nebuchadnezzar? Aren't you glorious? You see, Nebuchadnezzar had a sort of form of pride that Timothy Keller calls cosmic plagiarism. You might remember from school the idea of plagiarism. I'm still taking grad classes right now, so like for my class in the spring, I had to write a 15-page paper on Joshua chapter 1. About 60% of what was in that paper were not really my thoughts and ideas. This is how you do research in academia. You read all sorts of books, you read commentaries, and then you write down, well, this person says this, and this person thinks this, and this idea is from here, and you include everybody else's thoughts, and then you kind of organize it and analyze it and try to come up with something new out of what's gone before. That's how academic research works. And it's all perfectly fine as long as you give credit. I can quote other people, I can use other people's phrases, I can use their ideas, as long as at the bottom I put these little footnotes that said, this came from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. This came from Word Biblical Commentary. And I give credit where credit is due. What you can't do is you cannot write someone else's words and claim them as your own. You cannot even use their ideas. If someone has a certain interpretation of a passage that you really like, you can't even use their interpretation in your paper without saying, I got the basis for this idea from this particular book. You can't even use like a phrase. Like if they have a 3-word phrase that they use, you must reference it. You can't use anything of anybody else's without saying, let me give them credit first. Timothy Keller would say that the pride displayed by Nebuchadnezzar is cosmic plagiarism. He is taking credit for something that is not his. The credit belongs to the God of the cosmos. And Nebuchadnezzar is trying to steal his glory. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't understand that, listen, yes, you have a powerful army. Why? Because you were born into a very special family that gave you very special resources, and that is a blessing from God. Yes, you are an incredibly wonderful diplomat who made alliances and treaties, and you're gifted. Why are you gifted? Because God put that in you. Yes, you're intelligent. Guess where your intelligence came from? Yes, you're a good warrior. Guess where your strength came from? Yes, you have wealth and power. Guess where that came from? Don't you dare take credit, Nebuchadnezzar, for what I have given to you. And he missed the memo because he had this conversation with Daniel in chapter 2, remember? God is going to control the kingdoms. And he'll put whoever he wants, wherever he wants, whenever he wants, however he wants, because God is ultimately king. And he had this conversation with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3. Remember, he looks at him and he says, what God can save you from my power? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go, our God can save you from your power. You're nothing compared to him, Nebuchadnezzar. And somewhere along the line, it never really sunk in. He was more than happy to give credit to them, but to actually admit that there was a God above Nebuchadnezzar. I shared the quote last week, Friedrich Nietzsche, who is famous for all sorts of quotes, but this particular one, he says, if there is a God, I cannot stand the idea that it's not me. That's Nebuchadnezzar. If there is a God, I cannot stand the idea that it's not me. I'm the most important person in the universe, and God very dramatically goes, no, you're just an animal, Nebuchadnezzar. The same thing is true for you and me. We suffer from the same form of cosmic plagiarism. Now, you probably have never walked the walls of your castle and said, look at the glory of my kingdom. But you think to yourself, man, I've done really well. Look how good my family's turning out. Look how good my job, look how far I've come. Look where I started and how far I've gone. Look at what I've built. Look at my retirement. Look at my success in my business. Look at. That doesn't mean you didn't work hard. But you need to ask the question, who gave you the health to work hard? That doesn't mean you don't have great skills, but who gave you those skills? That doesn't mean you don't have a great family, but who allowed you to be born to a group of parents who actually love you? You know how many kids grow up and would just love to have a home where mom and dad both love them? Do you understand what a blessing that is in today's world? And the grand scheme of just to have two parents who love you is like, you're in the top 10% of the world, I think, anymore. You're born in a world where you didn't have to fight for food. You're born in a world where you could actually get a job. Who gave that to you? And so it's not that we don't work hard for what we have, and it's not that we aren't making the best of what God gave us. It's that we can't ever get to the point where we're Nebuchadnezzar and we stand and we go, hey God, I don't really need you anymore. I'm good down here. I got everything covered. Instead, when we have a success, we should go, God, thank you so much for what you've given me. When things go well, we should go, God, what a blessing that you surrounded me with these people. And hopefully it does not take you turning into a cow to get to that point. When Nebuchadnezzar finally gets there, verse 34. At the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to stop for a minute because I don't want you to miss this. Who's writing this? Chapter 4 is being written by a pagan king. The entire chapter is penned by Nebuchadnezzar himself. It starts in verse 1, which we didn't read. You'll see him take credit for it there. And we see it again in verse 34. I, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is writing this. This is his personal testimony of how God won his heart. At the end of those days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven, and my sanity returned to me. And now Nebuchadnezzar finally gets it. Then I praised the Most High, and honored him, and glorified him who lives forever. Here's that word again. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. That's your memory verse for the week. We've been doing those memory verses. We didn't put a card in the bulletin because you guys keep dropping them all over the place, and I have to come in on Monday and pick up. So it's actually on your tear-off tab this week, if you're looking for that. And part of the reason, I know I've explained this before, but part of the reason we're doing memory work is when Scripture lives in your heart, it allows you in the moment of temptation, or in the moment of weakness, or in the moment of struggle, to remember the truth of God's Word. And so when you're facing a situation and you're dealing with temptation, and you're like, I don't know where I'm going to go, I don't know what I'm going to do. If you memorize that verse from Daniel chapter 1, Daniel decided in his heart not to defile himself. I'm going to decide right now that I'm going to honor God. I'm not going to give in to this temptation. That in those moments where you're like, man, the chaos is all around me and life is overwhelming me and I don't, God, if you're even there, I don't think you're paying attention to me. You know, we memorized that verse from chapter 2. That God's kingdom endures forever. That God is still on his throne. That God is still seated on high no matter what happens to us. And this week a verse that speaks to our pride. In those moments where we think we've got it all together. We think everything depends on us. Then I praise the Most High, and honored and glorified him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. Who has a dominion? Nebuchadnezzar never really had dominion. David never really had dominion. Adam and Eve never really had dominion. God has dominion from everlasting to everlasting. So we're going to sing a song of I Surrender All. It's a recognition that God is ultimately in control. That God is ultimately king. Maybe you need to make that proclamation for the first time. Maybe you just need a reminder. Because I don't know if you're like me, but I need a reminder on a regular basis. That it's not about me. That it doesn't depend on me. That God is King of all kings. And so I surrender everything to him. And let him be in control. So why don't you stand and sing? If you need to make a decision.